have people. Hi, I'm Juli Wenger. I am a local Edmonton real estate agent. I run a boutique group called Soul Dig, and we're all about empowering people. But I'm coming at you more from my multi-passionate entrepreneur coaching lens today. I am a women's empowerment and entrepreneur coach, and I really lean into helping women find their fire and lean into their intuition and live their purpose so they can be the powerful and fulfilled humans that they were created to be. And today we're talking Enneagram because it is the most amazing tool and I am obsessed with it. Hi Kelsey. So what is the Enneagram? For those of you who have not yet learned about this, it's essentially a personality tool that allows us to really understand how we're inherently wired and how we're all different. We're all wired differently. We're all created differently. We all have different superpowers and different kryptonites that go along with that. Things that really we have to offer the world when we're in a healthy space, and things that when we're not in a healthy space totally take us out. So I discovered this last year when I was in a shit storm of anxiety and overwhelm, winning real estate awards, working 80 hours a week, feeling miserable, what is wrong with me? And there was this, I like to call it a cosmic 2x4 to the head that happened of listening to podcasts and the Enneagram came up, and then listening to coaching calls and the Enneagram came up, and everywhere that I turned and everywhere that I looked, Enneagram. I'm like, okay, I get it. I'm supposed to study this thing. And for me, it was really a journey into self-awareness and self-compassion. Because when we start to see how we are different than other people, we start comparing ourselves less. Because comparison is the killer of all things. And I started to understand how I saw the world differently than how other people saw the world. And I started to see how we all interact in very different ways with our surroundings, and we engage in different ways with our surroundings, and I was able to start developing a lot more compassion for other people. And compassion is really, really important right now because we're in a global crisis. And some of us are like, can we stop talking about the pandemic? Because it's what's next? And there's a lot of other people, there are a lot of people who are still in the fog. And they're like, I don't know what to do next. Because a pandemic or a global crisis or a personal crisis triggers victim and it triggers scarcity. And we go into this self-protective mechanisms and patterns. And the Enneagram helps us understand that. So really quick intro to Enneagram, 101 short version. We have 9 different base types of personalities. And each type, everyone's got a dominant one. There's a lot of layers to this that we're not going to get into today, but we'll run you through the types quickly. Type 1, because they're all numbered 1 to 9. Type 1 is called the perfectionist. And the perfectionists, they're doers, they like to have some certainty, they make sure stuff is done right. And they are justice-driven, amazing humans. Our type 2s are the helpers, and the helpers are the givers and the feelers and the empathetic ones. Our type 3s are achievers. They are success-driven, get stuff done. Doesn't matter if it's perfect, but let's knock it off and make it happen. And they're very image conscious. Our type 4s are the creative romantics, and they're the ones that see all the beauty in the world. They're kind of individualists. Type 5s are the observers or the investigators. They're people that kind of sit back and watch the world, and they take in information and they study. They're more analytical, less feeler driven, less empathetic. Our 6s are loyalists. They're the ones that want to know what to expect, when to expect it, how it's going to happen, and can I trust you? They're kind of our worst case scenario thinkers, which can be a very important skill set to have in our organizations. Type 7s are the enthusiastic optimists. These are the bubbly, big picture, vision creative people. And they always have ideas, and they're always looking for the next adventure. The 8s are the challengers. They're the fire. And 8s, they live for confrontation. Conflict is connection for a lot of 8s. And again, very like justice driven, but protectors. These are the protectors of people who can't protect themselves. And then the type 9 we call sometimes the sweetheart of the Enneagram. They're the peacemakers. They are all about inner calm, low key, like let's just kind of float through life. Now what's interesting about the 9 types is they're sorted into 3 groups. There are, if you've heard of like the 3 brain concept before, this kind of ties in with that. Head people, people who process the world primarily through thinking. So that's our observers, our loyalists, and our enthusiastic optimists, our 5s, 6s, and 7s. And they think their way through life. We've got our 8s, 9s, and 1s that are instinct people. They're gut people. They feel their way through life via instinct, and they are activity based. And then our 2s, 3s, and 4s are the feelers. And we, so I'm in that range, we process the world by feeling our way through it. So like, as a quick example, if I ask a gut person, how do you feel about that? They're gonna look at me like, I'm sorry, what? And this was really interesting for me because as a feeler, I expected everyone else to respond to the world the way that I did. And I thought that if they weren't, that they should be, because that's how it works, right? And when I started to understand that like, oh no, like my husband is actually a gut person and he doesn't process through feeling, he doesn't process through talking things out, he is not interacting primarily, you know, perceiving the world and putting himself out there in the world via feelings. It's like literally not how he is created. I started to have a lot more compassion for him. Now, what's showing up right now? Because this is really fascinating. I'm going to jump out of Enneagram for a second into a concept that I learned recently from Jodi Carrington. Like, who else loves Jodi Carrington? I'm like obsessed with this lady. Like, she is the next Brene Brown in my life. She talks about this psychology concept of like, you've got your limbic brain and your prefrontal cortex that wraps around it. And this is where fight, flight, and freeze live. And interestingly, in an Enneagram context, by those like thinkers, feelers, and gut people, these are our flight people, generally speaking. These are our freeze people, and these are our fighters. So it's really a fun tie between. But she talks about how when we get triggered into stress and anxiety, our prefrontal cortex, which is where our reason and our logic and our rational and our like inner knowing and wisdom live, we flip our lid. And when we flip our lid, we don't have access to all of this. We have access to fight, flight, and freeze. This is why people are hoarding toilet paper. Like, if you're having those conversations, like, what the hell is wrong with people right now? It's because they don't have access to all of their learning and their knowledge and their ways of coping right now. They have access to this, and this is self-preservation, period. And so for us, using a tool like the Enneagram is actually really fascinating because we can start to see where do we function at different levels of health. This is one of the things I love about it versus other personality tools, because some of the tools are such a snapshot in time. And this one is really more of a like, hey, here's how you look in your number when you're in a really healthy mental, emotional, and spiritual space. This is how you look when you're kind of average. This is how you show up when you're not in a great space. And when we're really not in a great space and we run out of resources in our dominant numbers, like I'm a 2, when I'm average, I am like really relational. I give a little too much. My boundaries aren't like amazing. And when I'm in stress, I start to go to a little bit of codependency. I'm needier. So I can start to see that and go, ooh, I might be tracking there. But when I get really triggered and I start to flip my lid a little bit, I have this line on this Enneagram diagram. It looks kind of like woo-woo, but just track with me here. I move over to take on some of the negative characteristics of the challenger. We run out of resources and we start to reach out for something else. And that's what we call our stress number. And there's a lot of humans right now that are taking on the characteristics of their stress number, and they're showing up in ways where they're like, I just don't feel like me. Or like, Kelsey, I'm gonna pick on Kelsey even though this isn't like true, but Kelsey is showing up not like Kelsey. Like, what's the deal? And we have these conversations about really being able to tell, like, are people in their integrity or not right now? But sometimes it's hard for people to be in their integrity when their lid is flipped. So it's really important for us to understand that each type, when they drift off to their stress number, shows up differently. So as a type 2, I start to get aggressive and micromanagey and snappy and reactive. And for a helper that is usually very warm and loving and accommodating, that's a big shift. And the people in my life that have been on this journey and understanding how the Enneagram works, they're like, psst, Juli, you're showing up in your stress space. And then I can start to make a different choice. Or I see it coming and I lean into my toolkit of what are the things that help me be centered and healthy and get back to neutral. So for all of the numbers, what we're seeing right now is, say, like, type 1s are perfectionists. They're being kind of irrational and they're being, call it like emotional teenage girl syndrome. They're kind of going inside themselves. They just don't seem like normal. Our type 2s are going to like codependency, aggression. Our type 3s, who are like the image conscious ones, they're wearing sweatpants and binging Netflix right now. Our 4s are getting codependent because they take on some of the negative characteristics of my number and playing the victim card extra heavy. The observers are starting to not think things through, which for a very analytical type is like a weird thing to have show up. Our 6s are going to workaholic hoarding. Our 7s are getting perfectionist and needing certainty, and they are typically the most variety-driven type. And when a 7 starts going like, I just need some certainty, and they start procrastinating even more because they can't do things perfectly because they're taking on negative perfectionist tendencies, it's really fascinating. Our 8s are going inside themselves. They're shutting down and digging into data. And our 9s are panicking. Our 9s are going into that space of like needing to know like what's going to happen and the worst case scenario thinking and just being like generally freaked out by what is going on. And all of them are feeling not like themselves. So what the Enneagram gives us is a path back to ourselves and a path back to neutral and an understanding of how we're wired, what shows up for us. So that is like the fastest Enneagram 101 that I've ever done in all of time. But I will say, if you want to understand more about it, it is like legitimately the most fascinating thing. And we just did a Instagram series on it that was talking about Enneagram and stress. So if you want to follow me on Insta and go do some digging on that, or if you want to drop me a note, we could chat about it. And then the other place where we talk about some of this stuff, and we're also digging into like women's entrepreneurship empowerment, is in our Thrive On community on Facebook. So if you're not in there yet, I would love to support you through this like journey into the unknown. I feel like I should be singing Elsa. Any other moms on here that have watched Frozen like a bazillion times? And it really is unknown, but there's some excitement there and there's some opportunity there for us to lean into like, what are the patterns that are showing up and how can I take a tool like this and use it to show up more effectively in my own life, which builds the foundations for our businesses, and also to understand how my team is wired or understand how my family is wired, although you've got to be careful with this in kids, we don't type other people. And then understanding like how your clients are wired and how you can show up for them and what their pain points are and how we can be of service to them right now. It is so massively powerful. And we talk about that in a lot in some of our coaching programs. So thank you for watching, and I hope to connect with you outside of this. And does anyone have like questions? We've got like a couple of minutes. I talked extra fast. See if anyone pops on here with anything. I'm a face toucher also. This whole COVID thing, I'm like, I wash my hands a lot. Okay, let's call it good. Thank you for watching, and I hope I have inspired you to do a little digging into the Enneagram, and I'm here to support you in that and your entrepreneur challenges, and I wish you all the most safety and health and connected social distancing possible. Okay, bye. Have an awesome Wednesday.